Alert.
All right, everybody, I just pressed the record button. This is January, what is it, the 13th today? Yeah, 13th today. And this is the Leadership in New Science discussion group, where we're not really discussing studying the book, but we're having a conversation that's informed by what we've read in the book and our backgrounds and our experiences and everything else. So first of all, I just want to welcome everybody, say how glad I am that you're here again. I've been looking forward to this since last week. And any reflections after last week before we jump into some of the things that I had thought about to organize our time this evening?
I'll just add one thought. I really like the fact that there's a diversity of professions in the group and perspectives. And I know that I wrote to Tom and shared some of my ideas. And I think it's great that we have people coming from multiple backgrounds to kind of shape our ideas. So thank you for compiling that group of diverse thinkers here, Tom.
Yeah, most people I know fall into the diverse thinker category somehow. And I'm sorry that I don't know anything about Marty tonight. She may be joining us late. I don't know. I don't think she's traveling this week, but she travels a week or two a month. But hopefully she'll be here. She seemed to enjoy last week. We stayed on afterwards, Aaron and Marty and I, and had a continued discussion. So that was good. Any other thoughts? And oh, sorry, go ahead. Somebody was going to say something.
Look, I'll jump in here. I don't know if anybody's read this book.
Oh, no.
The Butterfly, Andy Andrews. I've used this for some of my presentations 10 years ago, but this is without saying it, it talks about the quantum world and the connections that we all have and how important our actions as individuals really are. So it's a quick read. I read it, I vividly remember because it touched me so. I was waiting with my wife to have the oil changed in her car, and I got it read in that very short term. It was on Google Books at one point in time. It would be an easy way to get it. I gave these to seniors as graduation gifts a couple of years ago, but it's a phenomenal connection, without seeming to be connected at all. You start to find those connections, and Andy does a great job of sharing those and letting each and every reader know how important they are to the world and to the lives in that world, by what you may believe to be minuscule actions really aren't at all. So if you get a copy of it, it'd be great. So and it's a great explanation of the connection of the quantum world. And it talks about the butterfly effect, which was poo-pooed when it first came out.
Yeah.
And now it's the law of sensitive dependence upon prior conditions, and it's a physical law. And Edward Lorenz, when he discovered it, he's a meteorologist and was working with weather and mathematical models. And always truncated out at the hundredths place. And one time he didn't do that. He let it run out to the thousandths place. And he couldn't believe how big the differences in the outcomes were, with those very, very, very tiny numbers at the end, just because he hadn't rounded them. And that's where, the theory came from, that, butterfly moves its wings in the tropical rainforest, can cause a hurricane on the other side of the earth. And it's a proven, it's no longer a theory. It's a full-blown fact. So
it's referenced, Bob, in the book too, in this book on leadership.
Okay, say that again.
It's referenced actually in a later chapter.
Okay.
Exactly.
I haven't got there yet.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I touched on last week, and this is going to sound a little strange, so I like it. when we talked about the whole idea of relationships and connections, which is kind of like to me, the leitmotif. Well, I remember reading Karl Marx. Okay. I'm not a communist. I want to just put that out there first.
It's okay.
Although I got to say, the intent of communism was pretty damn good. It just can't happen, apparently. But here's what he said. And I thought I had to come back, and it's pretty shocking. He says, when you remove people's emotional connection to their labor and treat them merely as machines that produce effort, it's soul killing. And that to me is kind of a lot of what this book is about, is when you don't have relationships and all you're doing is like, I go back to education, when the whole purpose is testing. When you're looking at effort and you're not looking at the individual human being and the connections among and between, it's soul killing. So you're going to have the effect on kids that depression is going to go up, suicide is going to go up, anxiety is going to go up. So I thought that Karl Marx didn't always say everything great, but I thought that was really, really pretty good. And it was reinforced on page 39 of this book, where Wheatley says, we need to become savvy about how to foster relationships, how to nurture growth and development. It is an energy that comes into existence through relationships. And when I was teaching online in spring of 2021, and then luckily in person in 2021 in the fall, energy was the key word. The dimension of energy between kids would talk to each other before they got in quick groups, they shared ideas. There was an energy there that could never be there when I had a screen of folks. And so I thought that was really an important part for me. It's interesting that science recognizes that, and yet when we really teach science, we poo-poo that.
You know,
Anyway,
Allie,
that's a good point, Allie. And I can sympathize with that, in that the part of the book that spoke to me this week was in regards to projections and the waves associated with projecting ideas and concepts about people, or about your perceptions of people, and just how strong that can be within an organization or a school or wherever it is. You know, kids that are thought of as problem child and get classified as that is something that stays with them. Kids that we hire in our company who, you know, somebody says, oh, well, they're not really picking it up as fast as they could, or they're a superstar or whatever it is, how much weight that projection and that energy wave causes for the person's perception of themselves and people's perception of them. It's a really interesting concept to me.
Yeah, true.
That's another thing that I remember she talked about in the book. And I related that, in my mind, that spoke to this whole idea of field theory and creating these energy fields. And I don't know for sure, maybe it was on a Jamboard where I put a link to a Will Smith YouTube segment. And it's not the one that I had heard before, but I heard an interview with him a few weeks ago where he was talking about this very thing, that he made a decision, and this was somebody in his youth that had impressed this upon him. He made a decision to basically create an energy field every time he walked into a room that would be attractive, that people would be drawn to it. And it was a very conscious effort on his part. And at the end of the YouTube clip, he speaks a little bit about that. But that was something that really struck me in the book this week when I was reading about it.
Is that the actor, Tom?
Yeah. He just finished a film about the Williams sisters that was really outstanding. And he did a tremendous job. But I was really impressed by this whole idea of how we create an energy field, or can create, or also how do you tap into a positive energy field that you feel around you? Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Probably not. And Jeff's
But don't-
going,
No, it does. I mean, she referenced that in the part about where she talked about them going into stores and
Yeah.
sensing that the customer service was just somehow better. And that's a real thing. That's you can sense energy. It's probably not as well documented or, studied as well as it could be, but people sense energy, they sense positivity, and figuring out how to tap into that is a unlimited resource.
Yeah, but what was interesting, Aaron, there was that, when he asked, how would you describe this energy? What's the difference in these two shops, in these two stores? They couldn't describe it.
Right.
That was
Right.
fascinating.
But,
Something that I think
Ally,
people
sorry.
don't think about is that a person who creates positive energy or positive feelings, most of the time that person is really trying to do that, and the observers and the rest of the people in the room just take it for granted. They go, oh, well, that's the way that person always is. They don't realize that they're making a concerted effort. They're thinking about it. They're trying to come up with something they could say that'll bring people together. And the other people who never do anything like that are very dismissive of it, in my opinion, because it's a gift, but it isn't just something you open your mouth and it comes out either.
I was thinking about that energy field with regards to what you were saying, Allie, as well. That if you go to Detroit and in the museum that's right in downtown Detroit, they have one of the huge Diego Rivera murals, and I forget maybe the Detroit Museum. I can't remember which one it is, but it's an entire wall, and they're trying to depict the energy that you pick up at the Ford automotive plant. And so it really is this tons of effort, and every human is kind of slunched over and carrying the weight of the world. And then you see them all leaving at the end of the mural. You see them all leaving and they look completely distraught and disconnected from anything. And the energy that's coming off of Ford is just this vile kind of, maybe you can't even, it's not tangible, but you can see it through Diego Rivera's mural. It's really an incredible way to capture that relationship between the humans, but also the relationship between people and their work. So in terms of an artistic representation, I'll find the picture and maybe put it in the notes.
How does this relate to quantum theory and Newtonian? This concept of energy. Who's our scientist?
I wrote to Tom about this because I've been sharing a lot of these ideas. Both my husband and my son are both science people. And so I've been reading passages, and my son, who's at UConn in Organic Chem 2 and loving it, which to me is a whole separate world. He's frustrated with some of the science because he's saying it's lacking in depth. And he's saying that they're cherry picking aspects of the science and that it works for us as educators. But he said if you had some physicists sitting around the room, maybe they would have a different interpretation. So I do think that there's an analogy that she's really playing out here where it's not necessarily pitting, we shouldn't be pitting Newtonian physics against the quantum physics, but rather understanding that it has progressed from Newtonian and they're both mechanical. So I'd love to hear Aaron's thoughts on this, because as a mechanical engineer, I'm sure that you're coming at this from, and I think, don't we have some other engineers here too, Tom?
Actually, I don't think so.
So maybe I'm leaning on you, Aaron, but there are some elements of it that I think probably that maybe you would say that the analogy is she's trying to stretch it a bit more than maybe her scientific background allows.
Well, I would say that Tom and I actually kind of talked about that this week, because in reading it, I was thinking about the age of the book and how quickly physics and theories progress. And she wrote this at a specific time, almost 30 plus years ago now, Tom, or something like that.
30,
and
92 was the original copyright.
Okay. So what has progressed and what would still be applicable? I guess she's come out with other versions and she's probably tweaking it to some degree, but I never studied quantum mechanics or physics to the degree that I should have, I guess. So I can't really speak to that, but I would say that it does feel somewhat cherry picked. Now, kind of on a tangent here, I'm doing another book study right now with my work colleagues called Traction. And within the first like 2 pages, I looked at Tom and I'm like, this is completely Newtonian. It's set up of, here's a list of things to do. If you do all of these things in this particular order, these are the results that you'll get. And so if you want to see a complete polar opposite of this particular framework, you can check out Traction. It's an interesting Newtonian approach to management.
With more of the boundaries and subdivided sections and lists is what you're saying.
Oh my gosh, it's all about boxes, and he actually breaks things down into your 10-year, your 3-year, your 1 year, your 90-day, your 1 week, your 1 day. Like, he's got all these different things that you need to set up as metrics in order to confirm that you're moving forward in the way that you can be the most productive and successful. And it's just,
oh my God,
the
that
180 degree opposite.
that I'm going
It kind of did me, Allie.
Oh my God, I'm just going through, my annual review is due tomorrow and I am up for my 3rd year review for as full professor. I mean, you know, every 3 years, full professors. It's all due tomorrow. And I have procrastinated this piece of crap because it's like an audit of something I've already accomplished. I would rather put that energy into something useful than creative. And I tell you, I'm almost tempted to just not do it. And that would be the biggest rebellious thing that this little conservative in Nebraska has ever done. But I am God, it's just listening. This is check boxes. It's you can't just put your CV up there. You have to put everything in individually. It is mind blowing that this is the kind of stuff we're still doing.
You know, one of the things that resonated with me in this, and I think it relates to this, I guess, the different people and the different ways that people have of relating to things, is the quote that she makes, the comment that she makes on page 36, when she talks about people stop being predictable and become surprising. And, you know, Allie, I'm just thinking in those reviews, they're very predictable and there are very, very much things that we're expected to say and, you know, goals and things that we're expected to talk about when we're doing reviews. But think about what could happen if, in addition to that, the surprising piece comes out. And I think it's really so neat to think about that because the predictability is more of the Newtonian piece, and of course the surprising more of the quantum. And I just love that image. And then of course when she says each of us is a different person in different places, I don't think people think of themselves that way, but opening people's eyes and minds to the fact that that can be is so liberating and invigorating. So that's why that piece resonated with me. And I don't have any background in physics or much of anything in science, but this piece just stuck with me. So I don't know if that helps, Allie, but.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
That's what I would do if I were writing your review. For me, if I were myself in your shoes.
That is great. I love that. I think I'm throwing that in there.
Good thing we're recording this in case you want to go back and listen to it.
Like to play it for the faculty. No, more importantly, the administrators. No, but they don't ever have to do these things, which is interesting.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that occurred to me this week as I was trying to think about the whole work is that, and actually Leah helped me with this today by talking about, you know, hey, is this really Newtonian versus quantum? And I thought it really is just the establishment of metaphor and an extended metaphor. I think back to the days that Jeff and I taught English together. So it's an extended metaphor for me that allowed me to finally say, okay, you know what? You can almost look at an organization or a task or whatever it might be and say, would this be more of a relationship-based organization or endeavor, or is it a more of a mechanical one? And I put somewhere, you know, gosh, like with Marty, I'm sure glad her pilots all go through a pre-flight checklist. I don't resent the Newtonian discrete element part of that. But when I look at working with people, and particularly working with kids, it's, hey, this is relationship based, and it's not appropriate to try to break it down the other way. Instead, we need to be asking different sorts of questions that are, you know, what kind of energy does Allie infuse into the faculty because of the experiences from all over the world and the people that she knows that she can draw on? Or with Linda, with the groups that she's worked with in Atlanta, it's kind of the same way. It's this metaphor of relationships are primary. And so, you know, I don't know, Linda, if your organization that you work with does a lot with checklists, or it's, I get the idea from the little I've talked with you about it, that it's much more relationally based.
Well, we're trying to be, especially, and actually there was a meeting today. We've got a dashboard.
Can you tell a little bit about what you've been doing?
Mostly work with nonprofits, but probably the one that relates more to what we're talking about is I'm on the regional board of the American Jewish Committee. And so that is all relationship based completely and entirely. And it's about the tagline used to be building bridges. And so it was building bridges between communities, whether they're interracial or interethnic or interreligious. And that's what it's about. It doesn't really matter what we put it on paper, where we want to be and who we want to meet with and how we want to get there. But you can't just check the boxes. It's all about who you have a relationship with and how you can use those relationships to make relationships with other people that you don't have them with. So yeah, it is totally relationship building.
The other part that I really liked was the Berlin Wall thing. Do you guys remember that on page 44? Where, and you know, I happened to be national president of the American Association of Teachers of German in 88 and 89. So the day the Berlin Wall, I spent those 2 summers in East Germany, actually recruiting folks for our local chapters in the state in preparation for the Boston ACTFL meeting in 89. And I was there that summer, and I could, you know, she talks about, you know, the local actions can have enormous influence, kind of goes back to Bob, to that butterfly effect on monstrous systems that had restricted all political attempts to change it. How a few people, and I detected that energy when they had what they called the dacha, where they weren't being recorded and observed, which were out in the country. And there you could actually hear people talking freely more than they did anywhere else. And you could see that the satellites were influencing. They could now access satellite and seeing what the rest of the world lived like. And a few people began to become rebellious. And pretty soon more people became, and the few people on the very bottom of the system, of the caste, shall we call it, were the ones that really made the difference and finally had that crossed, began in Hungary and began to cross the borders, and finally they just barraged the wall itself and crawled over it. But the importance of those individuals, man, that's kind of something that resonated with me in today's political system. Each of those little acts can have huge political implications. I like that too. Can we do that with the American Senate? Can we do that?
So I find this book, I don't know what I think about the book, to be honest. So, but I think the thing is that there's a power piece to all of this. And in the Newtonian description that she gives, it's very much a hierarchical, power-based, do it this way, follow it this way, make it happen this way. And Tom, I would say you're right in that, if I'm a pilot, or, if I'm turning on my computer or whatever, there are steps that we need to take to do certain things. But in organizations, it really comes down to whether the leader is so full of themselves that they think they're the smartest person in the room. And if you're the smartest person in the room, then you're going to construct what people are going to do and how they're going to do it. And you're going to analyze the test scores yourself, because nobody else could analyze them as well as you could. And then you're going to make the action plan that you're going to present to the group of people who, really had the biggest hand in the test scores being whatever the test scores are or aren't. And then, you're going to lead them through this process so that, it's all going to get better without any other voices coming in there, because obviously, you're the smartest person in the room. But the thing is, how arrogant is that? How arrogant is it for a person or a group of people to assume that they're smarter than everybody else there? And how arrogant is it to not listen to other voices, invite those other voices and learn from those voices, and together begin to construct a plan? So I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's physics or if that's some kind of sociology. I don't know how to describe those things, but really it has to do with how we interact with each other. And when you look at the world, it's always somebody trying to exercise power over somebody else, a country over another country, a philosophy over another philosophy, a religion over another religion, because this one is right and this one is wrong. So I guess what I'm asking is, how does that fit into what we're discussing? Or is that an additional piece? I don't know, because really, if we were in a place where we looked for commonalities, if we had respect for the people and the voices around us, if we all took on the position of learners instead of dictators of the way, how different would our world be? So I think what I'm struggling with is how it fits in that my I don't know, what do you call it? My evaluation of life. How does that fit in with Newtonian and quantum? I'm not sure.
Well, if I may, I think that her bringing out the concept of self-organization, and she even later uses the term self-regulating. And the idea is that, science has shown that organisms and, organizations are just, an organism in a way, that organisms have succeeded without necessarily having a leader, even though nature also includes the whole alpha male thing, which I think is very powerful and very real. The quantum science is suggesting that self-organization is actually proven to be extremely successful, and it doesn't necessarily depend on, a charismatic leader.
Mm-hmm.
I actually had a story that did come to mind. this week about the idea of a leader. And we were talking earlier about a good leader and their influence. But then there's the other side, of course, the shadow side. And we had a situation where we had a merger, and a guy that had led one of the 3 divisions in the company, very hard driver. Actually, you know, it was found out later that he had a tendency to stretch the numbers and so forth. But anyway, very, very authoritative and so forth. And he became the COO after the merger kind of shook itself out. He lasted for less than 6 months, which was really amazing in terms of the COO of the company, all of a sudden being gone. Well, I think the reason I think I've got some information afterwards to indicate this, but the board quickly realized he was not going to have what it took to lead an entire organization, you know, the culture that was needed and so forth. He wasn't the guy. So.
Part of the danger may be trying, for what I sometimes think, is trying to make it an either or thing. It's, you know, you need somebody who understands the numbers, but still can relate to people, still has the relational part.
He was horrible. He was horrible with relationships. He really was.
Yeah. I had a superintendent like that. That was, I mean, you could ask him any number and he knew it, but boy, was he bad with people. Just had no understanding of how to really function as a human being. He learned, though. He was a learner. He did develop over time and ended up in a different district in North Carolina very successfully. But I have a good friend there. Actually, Leah, it is Leslie Baldwin's district, is where our former superintendent went. And actually, I think he learned a lot, but it was painful for him at times. But yeah, not either or. We need both. I want to bring it back for a minute to this whole idea of relationships and building strong relationships. Here's one thing that has puzzled me that somebody can help me think about, and that is, I look at schools and learning as absolutely dependent upon relationships. You got to have that student-teacher relationship. You want the kids to have a positive relationship with the subject matter, on and on. It's relationships. And yet, if we look at relationships as absolutely vital, what do we do mechanically in schools to promote relationships? Many of the folks here taught foreign languages, and one of the real advantages we had was we oftentimes had kids year after year after year, and that made all the difference in the world. And yet, why don't you have the same English teacher for 2 or 3 years? Or in elementary school, you know, they tried in Kentucky, and Bridget probably is way too young to remember this, but they tried what they called ungraded primary, where they would have kids, the same teacher would have kids for at least 2 years, sometimes 3. And it failed primarily because they didn't pay attention to the teachers and help them understand what was really going on, and why and what they could do with that. But I think, gosh, why do we just pretend like with kids that we can move them around like widgets through a schedule, and it doesn't matter? Who cares if, you know, Maria has Mrs. Delgado second period and then, you know, Mr. Fuhrer third period, when she can't stand one or the other? No, that really does make a difference in what do we do. So
a couple of things. So I have this book. It's called "If You Don't Feed the Teachers, They'll Eat the Kids."
Right.
But the whole point of that book is that, and when I was teaching the principals course, I would always share it with them because I saw it my job as the principal to look after my staff. And I hear what Jeff's saying, but I saw myself as the emotional barometer in the building. So if I walked around like I had the weight of the world on my shoulders, I leached that to everybody, to the kids, to the staff, to whomever. And some of the schedule stuff we have is a product of unions too. And at some point, having the conversation about what's best for kids and what's best for teachers is a really important conversation. But I would argue that you can build incredible relationships within a building through care. So, we worry about sharing too much of ourselves. We worry about getting to know too much. We worry about being too personal. But really, a school is almost like a family. So if you want to transcend the boundaries that we create through schedules and all these other kinds of things, we need to do that through relationships, through care, through personalization, through touching base with every single person every day and just seeing how it's going, making relationships a critical piece. And it's the same with kids. It doesn't matter if you don't have them, 3 years in a row, but it matters if every time you see them, you ask them how it's doing. And what was your baseball season like? And, how's your little brother? Is he still making you crazy? Like all of those kinds of, I remember you, I know you, I care about you, go huge ways with kids and with adults. But also, I think the other piece to that is valuing what they bring to the table, respecting their contributions, asking for their opinions and their input, and actively encouraging them for being part of the problem-solving fabric. And when kids and teachers and parents have a stake in their school and a stake in the construction of the kind of community you're building, it's huge.
Well, Hazel, you mentioned earlier you didn't know how that really related to the quantum world. On page 39, she talks about to live in a quantum world, to weave here and there with ease and grace, we need to change what we do. We need fewer descriptions of tasks and instead learn how to facilitate process. We need to become savvy about how to foster relationships, how to nurture growth and development. And she goes on about the quantum world has demolished the concept that we are unconnected individuals. Much and more relationships are in store for us out there in the vast web of life. So that's kind of where the connection comes in. We are not unconnected. And that's kind of what the Newtonian world says we are. So, that helps a little bit to kind of understand where she's trying to come from and distinguishing that. But, we always hear these little maxims about, I think it was Maya Angelou that says, nobody cares how much you know until they know you care. And we kind of go, yeah, but it's so true. So true. We can probably all remember one teacher that actually cared about us, that made us feel like we had potential.
Another aspect of that whole relationship part is moving past that maxim is that the teacher and the student are involved in some sort of problem solving together. And I think that's often how you build a lot of relationships. A lot of us on the call are NADSful, NACESful, have worked together through different work projects. And it's in the laboring, like you and Jeff taught English together. It's in that laboring together that you build relationship in a way that's not contrived. I think a lot of times we throw out these advisory programs and relationship this and relationship that. The amount of SEL things that are being thrown at us right now is almost nauseating. I see the word SEL. Literally, I have a bile, like a gag reflux. I can't take it anymore. But if you put people together to do meaningful work and like struggle with stuff. So Allie and I had lunch together at the ACTFL convention when she was president, and a guy, Akash Patel, got up and was speaking, and he was very ebullient and filled with energy. And I thought, oh my gosh, this guy has so much energy. Like, it's like he had 17 lattes before he came to us. But he literally brings together classrooms and kids from all around the world. And he's now working with my students and saying, how can we get you involved in solving some of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals together? And it's in doing that work together that in a very natural way, we're building these relationships with kids, with teachers, with Akash, with lawyers that are French environmental lawyers living in Costa Rica, that it's not contrived. I just feel like that's the element of relationship building, and it's all, of course, environmental, a lot of the UN SDGs, and so that gets at that interrelated, web of, the butterfly and its impact across the world. So I don't know. I'm just thinking about that whole relationship, Hazel. I think you are absolutely correct about that. And how do we do that in a way that we can really sustain it? And maybe it's through more action projects, action work, meaningful problem solving. I don't know.
Leah, you're reminding me. I worked 13 years at Chrysler, and I was in procurement, and then there was engineering, and then there was sales, and then there was manufacturing, and that's the way I experienced the company, the work, the industry for years, for the first half of my career. Well, towards the last half, I ended up on a team, a cross-functional team, procurement, engineering, manufacturing, packaging, working on the redesigned Dodge Ram pickup, the first redesign of that vehicle in 10 years. And it was just completely different experience. I mean, I was working with these people every day that used to be classically on the other side of the silo. And yeah, I mean, I loved it. When I talk about my experience at Chrysler now, I tend to talk about the Ram pickup. And I ask people, on the street about their Ram pickup. And
well, that's the page 39 that Ali was just reading from, where you're moving from the rugged individual, which works well with the Ram pickup truck, onto the team player. That end of the paragraph towards the end of the page is talking about how you're, able to do fewer descriptions of task and facilitate that process that Ali wrote. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me.
One of the things, and I just put this in the chat about the middle school movement, which was a really big part of my life. I don't know if any of you have been involved in a pure middle school. Yes, I'm sure. I know Hazel and Neil O'Connor's the author of that book, was somebody that I had known and done some work with. In its purest sense, it was wonderful. It was relationship building. It was teaming with other teachers. It was creating that safety net around kids. And it was not doing it because we were bringing in canned prescriptive programs. We were doing it because of things that we came up with as our team, things that engaged the students, things that engaged us, and we worked off of one another. And the idea being that every child needed to have a meaningful relationship with at least one adult in that building, even if it wasn't directly on the team. The problem, and as a principal, as a middle school principal, I used to have to fight long and hard for this. It was a really expensive model to staff. And so unfortunately, a lot of schools began to do away with it. And I remember I was fortunate at one point in the 90s where I was able to actually get to a point where we did inclusion with special ed. And I had a special ed teacher on each of our team. Actually, I had 2 special ed teachers. And we had a place for teachers to meet where they could meet with parents, where they had their own office, where there was a tremendous amount of respect given to what they brought to that process and engaged parents as team members in that process. I wish there were an easy answer to the financial end of it, but unfortunately that turned out to be the demise of a lot of what middle schools were doing. And I don't know, I wish I could be more positive about that. It was a wonderful, wonderful thing in its best iteration.
Tom, in addition to relationships, a theme that I kind of picked up on was change. And a quote that I really like, and now I maybe lost my page. I put it in it has to do with change to survive, basically. It's the, if you look at, again, the history of life and organisms and so forth, that's the biggie in terms of driving change, is survival. And so, you know, I'm thinking of the education industry and the, hope you don't mind me calling it an industry, and the automotive industry, and just the company I was associated with, Chrysler, and from a brand standpoint, even more importantly, the Jeep and the Ram. But anyway, that since I joined American Motors, how many of you remember the Rambler or the?
I had one.
Okay. Since I joined American Motors in '87, Chrysler has gone through 5 major changes for reasons like distributor or dealer network, or not enough money to develop cars, or can't compete globally. Lots of different reasons throughout those years have driven, I mean, major change, mergers, takeovers, private investors buying it, Fiat buying it, now Stellantis. And I thought about education, and it's like, you know, what drives the change? What and what kind of major changes have occurred in education? And I know it's probably an old question, but it just was so stark when I looked at all those mergers and such in just this one company. So maybe I'd love to hear some thoughts about, you know, change.
Have you seen that cartoon, Jeff? Who wants change and all the hands go up? Who wants to change? No hands go up.
Right, right. And we folks down in the trenches, we weren't necessarily looking for change. We had a job to do and got a paycheck and hopefully enjoyed our jobs, but we weren't looking for major change. You lose
I remember
jobs,
hearing
you know,
that the only
jobs
ones
get
who like
lost.
the only ones who like change are wet babies.
There you go.
Yeah, I've loved this quote that I just put in the chat, and I don't know why, but it was in the original 92 edition of this book as the very first thing. It was the first thing you saw, and I actually had it printed on some cards one time because I just thought it was so powerful. As you know, it's not about just overthrow. It's, hey, when the time has come, we need to step into a new form. And you know, you can resist it or not, but gosh. You know what, it's 7:53, and I want to do 2 things in the 7 minutes we have left. If first of all, I want to give a chance to anybody who wanted to say something that hasn't had a chance. Perhaps there's something that was in one of the jam boards that grabbed you or that you wanted to put in but didn't have time. And then the other one is something that Leah and I had talked a little bit about earlier this afternoon in an email exchange. So were there other concepts that from this week's reading maybe that anybody wanted to mention, something that grabbed you or that you didn't like or that made you think? I try to be really good at exercising wait time.
It's good time.
Outstanding.
Oh, check that box, Allie. He's good at a lot, or maybe not quite proficient because I didn't allow long enough. Any what ifs? Oh, I know one for me. It was another thing that using this metaphor of relational versus mechanical did for me was I stopped thinking about linear positions. That's how I was taught to think. We're going from this point to this point, and we can tell where we are individually or where a kid is on that point. And instead, by injecting this idea, and I don't know if Wheatley would appreciate it or not, but by overlaying that with the idea of field theory and trying to position things on a plane instead of a line, it sometimes almost takes my breath away, because it makes me look at things that are going on, at people in situations, or students in learning environments, or anything else. It allows me to think totally differently. Language people, it's what helped tip my ship. No, that's a bad metaphor. It helped move me from thinking about linear progression along proficiency in a given language to plurilingualism. And it's like, okay, you can be here in this language and maybe a little bit in that language and more in that one, and that's all right. It's where you are. So,
but there's a couple of things in this chapter. There are two things. One on page 37, where she says, stop arguing about truth and get on with figuring what works best. I like that one. And then another one was, start thinking about strategic thinking and not planning. Now that resonates with me, because we constantly have these 3 to 5 year cycles of planning. And I'm not sure it accomplishes much, but if we start instead thinking about strategic thinking, we might get a little further advanced in our ability to change as an institution. But there's a lot in these first 2 chapters that really cause us to pause, to think about. And I think I missed it the first time I read those first 2 chapters, what the ties in were to Newtonian and to quantum theory. But I think I'm starting to understand that. Csikszentmihalyi talks about, I think it was Hazel that talked about this. Csikszentmihalyi talks about the need, whenever we do any kind of learning, especially in problem solving formats, there is an absolute need for a challenge. And that it has to be above where the kids are already, in a collaborative socio-cultural environment that is relational. But there has to be a challenge. And when you can really and the other thing in this chapter I liked, it said, to have an environment where you can speak truth without worry, which I don't know if any of us are feeling that anywhere anymore. Right here, yes, but I'm certainly not feeling that anymore, because people begin to label you very quickly, very judgmental environment. But that the whole idea that, we even say things like, I'm speaking my truth. I just get so upset with this kind of stuff. What is truth? If we really want to get philosophical about the whole thing, what lens are we looking at? Are we looking at religion? Are we looking at science? Are we looking at ethics? I don't know. Anyway, it really gave me some really cool thoughts. I like the challenge that this book is giving me. I'm learning way too much about stuff I'm not smart enough to understand.
I hear you. Well, listen, it's almost 8 o'clock, or 9, or wherever you are. I did want to have one other discussion, and I'm going to turn it over to Leah if she doesn't mind me putting her on the spot, because I've been thinking about how long are we going to do this, right? So Leah, share your thoughts, and then other people can chime in.
So I love to co-create this in the spirit of a relationship network here. But I was thinking that it might be hard for us to sustain every Thursday with all of our other life work commitments. But in more of the vein of like a book club, maybe we would take a month off, take 3 weeks to discuss a book. So it's getting into a little bit more depth than you would in a regular book club, but only do that for 3 weeks and then take a month off, read the next book, and then do the same, repeat the same system for 3 weeks. That way, maybe we hit 2 of the 3 and we, unearth different concepts and ideas. But I was thinking about you had just put Malcolm Gladwell's book Blink into the chat, and Talking to Strangers is one that I thought was so powerful last year, like hugely powerful book. And to be able to discuss that with this diverse group coming at it from different lenses, to take a month off, everybody read, come back at it. Maybe it's 3 weeks, maybe it's 2 weeks. I don't know. But I just thought that maybe we could do kind of an on and off cycle. And I'm just wondering what you thought about that.
And we don't have to decide tonight. You can,
Sure.
I'll put another jam board up or whatever that seems to work better.
And if it's a book like was mentioned by Bob on the butterfly book, maybe that's just, obviously it's a one-shot deal. It's not a lengthy thing. You can go to Valvoline and take that off your to-do list and be able to finish it by the time you finish changing your oil. And then we take it a week. So maybe it's dependent on the book. This one is very meaty, obviously, and required more time.
Well, Leah, the other thing I liked about that is Gladwell, for instance, with his work, speaks across various professions. And that's one of the things that I've valued about this group is we're not all teachers. We want Mary Beth and Linda and Aaron and the rest of them, Jeff, who aren't teachers, because we have so much to gain from one another.
And they interview so many great spies in that book that were undercover spies for long periods of time that were not detected by the CIA. It's amazing. And then you see them over 30 years, they went undetected as Cuban spies. Amazing. So yes, so it really gets at lots of different aspects. So I'm just throwing that out there because I saw you put Malcolm Gladwell in the chat.
Well, let's think about that. And I'm all for meeting next week again, and maybe is that enough time for us to wrap up leadership in the new science, or do we want to spend 2 weeks on it? Let me know what you think.
I think you really want to spend some time on this one chapter on change. It is absolutely phenomenal, folks. It is called the Change the Capacity of Life. It's chapter 8. And it is real. I think I underlined half of the stuff. But somebody in here mentioned the element of surprise. I've already written half of a paragraph about this. Okay, and I go back to the surprise for me tonight was Jeff's story about the ram and how that fits in with everything. All of these things that's what's happening in this group is kind of that element of surprise as I'm hearing people speak, how these things are so interconnected. So I'm seeing things through different lenses and not just necessarily through education. I'm hearing from principals, I'm hearing from engineers. It's really, which is kind of the whole purpose of this book, actually, right? Yeah. That's cool. Well, I think the idea sounds great, Leah. I really do think this book is rich. And so I'd honestly like to spend a little more time on this one. I'm still trying to understand it all.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, well, I think it might be.
What if we were to focus on chapter 8 for next time, and then the 4th week, look at that as a wrap up of trying to digest the book as a whole? And then by that 4th week, which would be 2 weeks from tonight, we formalize plans for what we're doing next. And in the meantime, suggest some of these books that would appeal. I don't want to do an education book.
Yeah, I don't either. I've had enough education books.
But I would like something like a Gladwell or Mary Beth is a font of.
Love Gladwell. Have you read Goliath, David and Goliath?
Yeah, that's another good one.
Yeah.
And Mary Beth, I want you to be sure to suggest some books. Mary Beth gives me the best reading suggestions of anybody.
Well, thank you, Tom.
She does.
Did Margaret Wheatley ever rewrite this book, though?
She actually has just written, well, I don't know how new it is. I've got it. Oh, I think I took it upstairs.
Yeah, I read her most recent one, which is really very impactful about this time in the sense of we're at a time where, in a sense, we have to actually act locally And how does that fit into this whole idea of these systems and everything, which is really interesting. But of course it does when you think back on what they're talking about here, that just moving a couple electrons over here has a bigger effect elsewhere. But I enjoyed it a lot. That's part of why I was interested in this group, because I had just picked that one up. And I guess I'm trying to think of why it came across my desk, because I'd read this one back in the 90s. And because I was in business at that time and IT stuff, doing that kind of stuff, leadership things. And I'm just trying to think of, let me just get the title. I've got my library here, find it someplace. Who do we choose to be? Who do we choose to be?
And it leans heavily on the ideas from Leadership in the New Science. So take a look at that in a Google summary or something and see if that might be interesting.
Facing reality.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. And yeah, I've always wanted to do a book club that was reading between the wines, where we pair a book with a wine.
Nice.
Make it a really enjoyable evening, but that's for a group decision.
Now you're talking.
Yeah, now you're talking, Tom. I like that idea.
I'm up for that, Tom, definitely.
Well, sounds like a winner. We can certainly consider that or offer that. All right. Well, great to talk with everybody this evening. Really enjoyed it, and see you next week. And in the meantime, be thinking, well, look at chapter 8 so we can really dive into that next week. And then think about, your overall ideas. Send me any suggestions, and I'll put up another Jamboard. Maybe I'll just continue them or start a separate one for ideas for a book to consider after Leadership in the New Science. Does that sound
Maybe
good?
for next time, since change, the whole thing is change, maybe we could each, so everybody gets a chance to talk, kind of think about some change in their own professional life or in their own life, and see how that interacts with what it says in this chapter here, something, so everybody will have an opportunity to kind of participate.
Thank you for that, Allie.
Good idea.
All right, you guys stay safe,
All
wear
right.
a mask.
Yeah.
All right. See y'all.
Yeah,
Bye,
take care,
everyone.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.